What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Layback Podcast. Joining us today is actually a good buddy of mine, Matt Solter. Solter and I got connected back during the 2021 spring when there was question marks all around independent league baseball. No one really knew what was going to happen. Solter was returning from a shoulder injury, not an elbow injury, but a shoulder injury himself. And we just stayed in contact after a little stint with what now became the Banana Ball Circus. But Solter was a part of that original group for a few outings, and he and I just became close, and it's been cool to stay connected with him, talk about the journeys, whether it's from the player side and now some of the really cool stuff he's doing on the coaching side as well. And the reason I say as well is because he is still a professional pitcher in the Atlantic League, while he is also the director of performance at Octane Baseball. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Matt, let him pick up the pieces for anything I might have said mistakenly or screwed up in the process. Matt, thanks again for coming on. Looking forward to this one.
Yeah, excited to be here. It's kind of cool how something is, I don't even know the best way to describe what Banana Ball started as when we were a part of it, but the friendships that created and everything that you've done and obviously helped me with and everything with Flex Pro Grip. So it's pretty awesome. Been bouncing around pro ball for a long time now. Went to Furman University, got my BS in health sciences there, and then classic senior guy hoping to get drafted, didn't, then got to play some independent ball. After that first year, got picked up by the Giants, was with them for 2.5, 3-ish years, got released in spring of 18. Indie ball, signed by the Indians in 19. Indie ball, little Venezuela, Mexico, indie ball.
Quite the journey. You certainly become a little bit of a world traveler, at least a traveler around the States at a minimum, with a few South American spots mixed in. So maybe kicking it off on the fun side, what have been some of the more unique places you've gotten to play ball?
Venezuela and Mexico for sure. Going into Mexico is a little easier after having been to Venezuela first, but with Venezuela, I had no idea what it was going to be like. Everybody, you look on the news, you talk to people like, man, this is going to be crazy dangerous. And you get there and it feels like this weird dystopian world that you're in. You've got like armed guards around, but then it's this beautiful country and baseball is a lot of fun. The fans were super passionate. So kind of the juxtaposition of you're kind of locked in your hotel when you're not playing, but then you get, whenever you're at the stadium, it's a lot of fun. It was about as unique as it could get in my mind.
Yeah, not many people have that experience, and I am personally jealous that you've been able to live that life and use baseball to travel the world a little bit. But let's get into now the progression of your own career, stepping things back to your time at Furman and what eventually became an opportunity in indie ball. So whether it's the whole tenure at Furman, your own progression, I'd really like if you could walk through that to then where you ultimately were as a pro ball candidate coming out your senior year.
So came in, was just super raw. I had only pitched really my on and off throughout my life, but more competitively really only my senior year of high school. So didn't have a huge body of work coming in, and was fortunate enough to throw all out my freshman year and was a 85, 88 guy cutting the crap out of my heater. Like had no idea about mechanics, had no idea about pitch metrics or anything like that. It was just, hey, don't fly open, or hey, don't do this. I'm a pretty good competitor and was able to have a solid freshman year. And then each year after that seems like baby steps were made. Sophomore year, I started closing a little bit, was more 88, 91. And then junior year was 88, 91, maybe touch a 2, maybe a 3. And then senior year comes around and a little bit harder. Pitched pretty well for what I had and for what I knew. And, it wasn't really until I got, even with the Giants, that I started understanding, like reading a swing, sequencing, kind of the more important things relative to just, hey, throw the fastball at the knees.
And what do you attribute some of those velocity jumps to?
Honestly, a lot of it was just how I was training. My buddies always gave me crap about this in college, but I was always trying to throw harder, especially freshman year. I was like, I want to hit 90. So then eventually took steps and started training with Cressy for a while, and I'd go there for a little bit and went there during a Christmas break once and was doing their stuff kind of remotely, and I guess gradual progressions physically, because I was kind of always a tall, skinny guy growing up, and I guess chased absolute strength for so long. It paid off at a certain point.
And when was the first time that you really picked up on the athleticism side of things? So you talked about chasing absolute strength for so long. I'm sure you hit the point, and it's obvious now. I don't know if anybody is watching or they're just listening, but you were a sizable human being. So I don't think the absolute strength really is low-hanging fruit for you at this point. And a lot of the probably sprinkle on top kind of gains have come from you getting more explosive or creating force faster. So I'd like to know when that step in the process kind of got on its way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was sprinkled in there when I was working with Cressy and them, that they obviously are really good at what they do. But I was just always really dumb. My focus was just, oh, just get stronger. Like everything needs to be to failure. And looking back, it's so annoying and so stupid because I'd be training with these big league guys and they'd be like, oh, I wish I was as strong as you. And I was like, well, shit, I wish I was in the freaking big league. So something's got to give. I think the biggest change was when I first started training at Octane. It was Be Young Performance. They rebranded into Octane, and one of the owners is a brilliant, brilliant physical therapist by the name of Brandon Young. Some of the stuff we were doing, whether it was basically a lot of sprint work, a lot of change of direction, a lot of rate of force development stuff, and that's what I've seen the biggest jump with for sure.
And that for you is only in the last couple of years, correct?
Yeah, I decided to wait until freaking age 29, 30 to to try to start peaking.
Was it one of those things that it was kind of like it's impossible to know what you don't know? Like you didn't know that this was a possibility or you just didn't have exposure to it, so why ever try it?
Yeah, that's pretty much what it was. And this timeline worked out really well when I got the job at Octane. I then got my CSCS and after kind of grind through that textbook to be ready for the exam and got really deep into the physiology. And again, Brandon is a master of the physiology as far as I'm concerned. He's a wizard. And we talk about different training modalities, different things to do. And then all of a sudden, not this past pro day, but the one before that, it was fine. I was like 91, 93, kind of moving slow. And then this last pro day, I sat 94 and a half. Was up to 95.3, and I was pretty much only after doing some overspeed work on the treadmill and some like rotational bat speed stuff.
What is kind of funny is how the training world has come, I guess, full circle on that to a certain extent. Like you look at maybe not the oldest school pitcher training, which might have just been empty soup cans or the like Job exercises. But then there was a point where the NPA model and the Tom House systems really took off, and that was so focused on bat speed, but for pitchers, trying to swing fast and stop fast. And then why not move as fast as possible? Oh, that translates directly into sprinting. But that kind of phased out when we realized baseball players need to get stronger. They need to get bigger. They can produce more force if they can handle more force, i.e., lift more in the weight room. And it's almost like the speed component was completely forgotten for so long. And thankfully, we've seen that come back into play.
Yeah, exactly. I guess even in the old school thought process, you hear a lot of guys, oh, don't lift, you're going to get bulky, you're going to lose your mobility. And that probably speaks into kind of how things shifted for a while was, hey, see how strong we can get and who cares what the adaptation is. As long as you're stronger, then if 20, 30, 40% of the people who do that start throwing a lot harder, like, oh, we don't really care about the other 60% of the dead bodies on the side of the road, as long as we get some guys better.
And it is kind of crazy that is how the world of baseball players works too, because every one of us, I'm willing to still say us on this, because if I saw something that got 20% of baseball players to throw 6 miles per hour harder, right now I would probably hitch my wagon to that and try to figure out how to do it and just hope I'm in that 20%. You look at the failure rates of some of these studies or training mechanisms, and whether it's guys getting hurt or guys struggling. And now I do think a lot of these things are sensationalized or poorly programmed, which is often why guys tend to get hurt with these things rather than the actual modality being bad or wrong. But it is astonishing to see how far an athlete is willing to go for that little tick up, just a small percentage chance of being better. And I think that is why all of us who are addicted to the game in any capacity probably are a little bit crazy.
Oh, yeah. And for me personally, like that's, my two loves. I absolutely love competing. I love going out, like shutting off the brain and just getting after it within a game. But my other big obsession is what's the most I can get out of my body. how hard can I throw? Of course, every pitcher's obsessed with velocity. There's a reason it's king, and everybody's obsessed with it. But sometimes competing with the actual love of competing is, what can I do with my body to get the most out of it?
Yeah, and maybe this is jumping ahead a little bit, but probably, and I say jumping ahead because it's completely skipping over the injury, what you had to battle through coming off of that, the velocity dip, your return, and then the massive change you made in the way you move and the way you throw. So maybe I'm just going to bury the lead a little bit and tease that component that you made this massive change in the way you move on the mound. But I want to step it back and go through the actual injury and what you had to deal with there.
Yeah, so the big injury was the shoulder injury at the end of the 21 season. I was with the Milwaukee Milkmen in the American Association and started off, had a really good start to the year. Started dealing with some like anterior shoulder pain middle way through and kind of grinded through it for 4 to 6 weeks. Every pitcher's been there, right? Like you push through pain, it's fine. Like you kind of know what's different. Towards the end of it though, like couldn't play catch between starts. My warm up on start days was only about, and I used to preface this with saying I was a massive long toss guy with my old slot and how I threw. So like start day, I was going to stretch that out to 300 and could barely get to 90. I'd ride adrenaline for 2, 3 innings. I would crash. I'd be in a lot of pain. I'd struggle, which would give me some more adrenaline, let me get back through the game. But the big thing before I would sleep at night, like I was having a really hard time because it felt like just an ice pick in the front of my shoulder. And I'd never really experienced that before. So that's when I decided, I was like, hey guys, we got to figure this out. So they had me see the team doc, saw the bone spurt and all the other things that go along with the shoulder. And they were like, yeah, we recommend surgeries. Might not have done that looking back on it, but at the time I was like, man, I'm in so much pain. Like I'll do anything to get out of this. So did a subacromial decompression, took out some bone, shaved things down, cleaned it up a little bit. And they said, yeah, you should be back competing, throwing within 2, 3 months. Like it shouldn't be a big rehab, which probably bad advice to give me. Because I was trying to play catch like 4 or 5 weeks after surgery, like an idiot, still in pain. But yeah, after that, velo had a big drop. If I hit 90, it was a really good day, and that was only a handful of them. I was sitting like 87, 88. As the velocity drops, you get away with a lot less. But then I guess the flip side of that was weird. Came to play a little bit of banana ball that year, then went to Staten Island in the Atlantic League and had a pretty good year. Threw a ton of innings, went to Venezuela that winter. But again, everything was 87, 88, and I guess I was just kind of competing and pitching instead of just trying to throw.
In this process, we'll go back through some of the rehab details in a bit. I know most of the time on this podcast we talk about the elbow, but I'd still be interested in what you went through. And then ultimately you made a shift because you were throwing 87, 88. It was almost like you were stuck there. You were in this plateau where maybe, like you said, a 90 would creep in once in a while, or on a glorious day, you might see a 91 pop up on the scoreboard, but that was becoming fewer and farther between. You elected to make a shift. I'd really like now if you could tell that story of this crossroads you were at and just trying to do something different.
Yeah, and I guess it was similar to college as a freshman, beating your head against the wall trying to figure out how to throw 90. And I was out there. There'd be games where I would let it eat, and you pop the mitt, you stand the guy up with a heater in, and you're like, "That's the one." Like we're back to that might be 94, and you look on the track band's 88, and you're like, "Damn, what's going on?" But honestly, I'm gonna give. We've talked about this in the past, but probably not in a while. But I'm gonna give a lot of credit of the shift to you because the first time I'd ever played with a lower slot was kind of when I was ripping this little like sidearm sweeper thing, and we played catch at that little field right outside the Banana Stadium, and you're like, "Dude, that's freaking good." So I was started mixing it in banana ball, just trying to feel it. And then the big change. So when I first came to Octane, I did the full 3D. We've got Wallace's 3D motion capture system. Got all hooked up, and I was like, hey, I've been kind of toying around with this slot. Like for me, it feels sidearm. Really, it's a lower 3/4. I'm toying around with this, so I threw my whole 3D with my regular, which is kind of trunk tilty, a little over the top. Over the top, arm slot hasn't changed, just the trunk tilt has. Then through the rest of the
Good
pen,
air quotes there.
Exactly. Through the rest of the pen with the lower slot, and they're like, yeah, we can already tell you're going to be throwing from there. So then it was just a battle of feeling what I need to feel, being in the right slot, because there was a lot of variance there. And especially that last year, honestly, when I first went to High Point in the Atlantic League, I struggled there, reverting back to old habits when the lights were on. right? Instead of being in this lower slot, just kept creeping. Stuff wasn't as good from there. Kind of get in between profiles too. Instead of throwing a really good sinker, you're kind of throwing a bad two seam, and everything just isn't as good. So, and then I guess carried through this last off season, just kept working through it. But it took 18 months of really working on it to feel pretty solid with it.
So what was the shift then on the TrackMan plot? We have plenty of nerds on the podcast who can picture a plot straight up in their minds. So feel free to dive as deep as you want to, whether it's getting into stuff like VAA and extension, or if it's just as simple as looking at vertical breaks and horizontal breaks.
So obviously the release height dropped a lot, but the big thing was instead of in the past, I was kind of not quite, it was a little better than dead zone, but not really. It would be like 16 vert, 16 horizontal, but then there would be some that were at 12 vert, some that were at 20. So it was really all over the place. And then my sinker that I threw from over the top, it was decent for what it was. It was like 9 and 20 or whatever. But then when I dropped the slot, all of a sudden you start seeing sinkers in the negatives and you're like, oh, that's pretty good. It's like you see the ball diving in a way that you've never made it work before. You're like, oh, damn, that's pretty good. Start seeing sinker. I think the best sinker I ever threw, it was lower velo, give air quotes again, because at the time I was throwing a little harder, but I threw one at 89 at -9 vert and like 22 horizontal. So just throwing some pretty, again, a lot of that probably wasn't repeatable or sustainable because I was probably getting the slot way lower than I needed to be, but that's kind of what sparked it. I was like, oh man, like I'm seeing these numbers that now that I understand them, this is actually really good. And you start comparing to some of the best sinkers in baseball, you're like, actually, that's kind of good. Just playing with the off speed off that, but that's kind of the sinker diving like that. And at points, averaging in the negatives was the first time I was like, oh, okay, like we're finally chasing stuff instead of just being a gym rat. Like maybe actually be good at doing the freaking job,
I do think it's really funny from some of the internal conversations that we've had when you were kind of at that crossroads and I was just trying to be a sounding board on my side. I brought up the Brandon Webb scenario with the Giants and one of the Logan Webb, my bad, wrong names, but how comical that was for you, just ironically or coincidentally, you seeing the evolution of Webb with your time in the Giants, of him making this shift or him being like an over the top kind of flamethrower, but for whatever reason was having poor results, made a massive shift in the way that he threw and had this newfound success, even though the velo dropped, even though it wasn't the norm. He was completely revolutionized. And just a couple years later, a guy who was once your teammate, you pretty much took the same journey.
Yeah, it's kind of cool to see that. I first met Webby when we were in low A, when I first got signed and sent to low A, and all the way back in, I guess it would have been 2016, which seems like an eternity ago. But yeah, it's been awesome to see him. So I look at a lot of what he does, his pitch usage, his pitch types, and he was kind of a big reason too that I spurred the use of the cutter because he's bumped that usage way up this year, especially the lefties. And for me, like the cutter is seeing crazy good results and metrically pretty good. When it's really good, it's 10 to 13 vert, kind of right on the zero line. And I'm not really looking for too much negative horizontal on that. If I can just create a little bit more of an illusion of a ride or a little bit of a cut off of everything else playing down, that's like guys haven't been able to cover both. And actually haven't had any really damage done on it in a year and a half now.
Hopefully that year and a half extends many more years.
Knock on any wood I can find.
Right, yeah. I don't know how much wood you'll find sitting in the squat rack, but hopefully there's something around, maybe an old broken bat or something just sitting in the garage. But let's step things back a little bit and talk about your specific rehab. I misspoke and said it was during COVID. Maybe I'm just mixing that up with your on-ramp for the season from when we got connected. So hand up, that's on me, my bad. But you were originally told coming off of surgery that you were going to have a very fast return to the field of play, which, as you said, might not have been the best thing for you to hear at the time. But what did that rehab process entail for you?
I worked with these awesome PTs in Greenville, North Carolina, Young's Physical Therapy, and they were great. A lot of shoulder work. At first, though, because of the nerve block I had in, it took me like about 10 to almost 2 weeks to be able to get like full range of motion back in my shoulder. So I was like, that's a little weird. I feel like it shouldn't have been that bad, but that was the big focus early, was getting all the range of motion back. And then pretty standard stuff on top of that, like strengthening the shoulder, doing a lot of T-spine work, probably a very good thing for me anyway. As a tight mover, I'm trying to think exactly what else I've done. That feels like an eternity ago too.
You've really lived a couple of lifetimes since then, given that since that time you've played in, I guess, three different countries on what, like five different teams, as
Yeah,
well as took the job with Octane. You've covered pretty much a lifetime since you've rehabbed your shoulder.
yeah, but I mean, bits that I can flash back and see right now, just a lot of shoulder stability, a lot of external rotation strength, T-spine every day. So those are kind of the big ones that I can remember at this point.
One of the things we talked about is the velo drop. Prior to surgery, just to give people some context, how hard were you throwing?
I'd be up to 95, 96 and probably sit in like the 2 to 4 range. Again, doing that with a little bit of kind of a ride run profile generally played pretty well for getting a little bit of swing and miss with it. And then afterwards, yeah, I was just stuck at 87, even though my body arm felt great at a point and the max effort rip was, I was like, man, that's the one, 87.
In 87 with not the exact same profile either, right? It didn't that start to change on you a little bit?
Yeah, then that started again getting a little more dead zoney, a little more bad to see me. And that's actually when I completely switched to throwing sinkers because I was like, man, if things are starting to blend that way anyway, let's just lean all the way into that. And it worked out pretty well. It was again like around the eight vert and like 20 horizontal mark. So, from a higher slot, higher VAA, so just kind of bowling ball straight down. But 87 sinkers ain't going to play for so long. And I was lucky to have some success that year in the Atlantic League. I threw, I think, 148 innings that year, another 25 in Venezuela, probably another 20 with the Bananas. So I had a huge workload, that started 6 months after surgery, but never really gave myself the opportunity to ramp back up in the way that I probably should have. And I
Mm-hmm.
guess to note too, I was signed to play in Melbourne, Australia that offseason, the one that had surgery. I talked to the doc and he was like, oh yeah, like you'll be able to be back out there in, a month or two. And I was like, I was sick. So like 4 weeks after surgery, I'm playing catch, shoulder still hurting, of course, because you just had surgery. I was like, all right, and I think they ended up canceling the season that year. Or I couldn't play. Can't remember the exact time, but definitely couldn't play. So wasn't able to go out there. I was pretty bummed about that. But yeah, that shows how kind of dumb I was at the time, especially. It was like, oh yeah, like we just had this little surgery. We put a little Band-Aid on it for 6 weeks and you're going to be throwing hard again. You're going to feel good. You're fine.
Well, 2020 hindsight, what do you think you would have changed in your own process?
I guess maybe not have surgery, but it's when you're in that much pain, it was kind of hard to. I mean, I was getting needled before I threw. I was getting needled after, like every single day. I mean, maybe it was just a space thing in the shoulder, right? Maybe working on a little bit more mobility or stability in the scap. Like, who knows what would have alleviated that? But I guess the good news is, knock on wood again, ever since that surgery, like my shoulder doesn't hurt ever. It feels good all the time.
It took a little bit to get to that point, of course, but
Yeah. But I
thankfully you're
guess,
there now.
yeah, but I guess to answer your question, I probably would have gone about the on ramp differently looking back now. Like, would have given myself a lot more time to build up. And I was just kind of on my, I didn't do a throwing progression necessarily with those PTs. It was just kind of getting me back to the point I could throw. Looking back, I would have definitely, maybe used like a radar guided velo progression to get back to what I should have been, or at least close, instead of, oh, all right, you go play catch, do your long toss 2, 3 times a week as you slowly build up over the weeks and expect that that's going to be good enough without getting any sort of feedback as to where you're at. Because I was just playing catch at a little field in my hometown
Hmm.
and had no tech out there.
Right. So it was, for you at the time, it was just all based on how you feel and it had nothing to do with any objective data.
Exactly. Which again sounds so stupid when you say it out loud.
It's the reality for so many people, though. That's just been accepted in baseball. That's the reality for everyone. Having a radar gun or a pulse sensor or something to track throwing in whatever capacity has been counterculture until 2024, 2025. Anyways, every program is written on distance and intensity. So why would you even think that, oh, let me radar gun this? Aside from, I don't know, maybe one throw here and there, but you and I both grew up in a time of college baseball where you were lucky to know how hard you threw in a college baseball game because you
Yeah.
had one radar gun and whoever was using the radar gun was told not to tell anybody how hard they were throwing. So you needed to finagle your way into figuring out how hard you were throwing on any given day.
Yeah, and even like for us at a small mid-major at Furman, like we didn't have any of that. So it was we'd always get extra excited to be on the road or at a big stadium that would have the performance meter up on the scoreboard, so you can give a little velo peek and you're like, 88, shit.
I'm sure it did feel good occasionally when you showed up, you played your opening weekend. Yeah, the rude awakening of like, oh my God, I only throw 86, but then like 5 weeks later, you're at some midweek game at USC or at UNC, and you find out like, oh my God, I hit 88. I'm getting better.
Uh,
Yeah, those are the days, right? Well,
those were the days.
let's fast forward now. We'll take some time talking about the other hat you wear as the director of performance at Octane. Yes, you're still pitching, so I want to talk a little bit about the season and what's going on now and getting back in pro ball once again. But I want to know about your transition into Octane, becoming the director of performance. You mentioned your CSCS already, and really just take it away. I know there's not really a question there, but talk about the opportunity and maybe what your day to day looks like.
Yeah, so it was really cool to get the opportunity. I've been training there for 6 months and just kind of ramping up for the season. And the old guy, he put in his 2 weeks, and they came to me pretty quickly after I'd been kind of given some advice on the side as far as what I think could be better on the performance side. And they said, hey, the job's yours if you want it. And first, it was kind of a thing where they were like, hey, if you're going to do this, like you're going to have to retire. And eventually, we were able to come to an agreement where I was able to keep playing and do it. And luckily, again, High Point was awesome with this too, and still are, that I'm able to do my job and then come pitch and just keep flip flopping like that. So I got the job, and I feel like everybody in the space probably deals with a lot of this, but the imposter syndrome was strong very early on, and I had no formal background with it other than my degree. I spent a lot of time training with Cressy and did some drive line. Kind of had an idea as far as training goes. I just kind of dove in and was just constantly learning as much as I could outside of working. So a lot of my down hours were spent, whether it was listening to podcasts or trying to read articles from people who are way smarter than me, and kind of help start to begin this process of learning. And luckily, that's probably never going to stop with me, because I'm just obsessed with learning what I don't know and trying to be better, because I feel so inadequate, even though I think we do such a good job at Octane now. But really just learning, going through the CSCS was obviously super helpful. I'm not a big believer that you have to have credentials to be a really good trainer or coach, but it was nice to just get back to like the base physiology of things and scientific principles of training that sometimes maybe with fads get kind of thrown to the wayside a little bit, and kind of structure everything from there. Zach Deshawn's book, I read that, and that kind of influenced a lot of how I started guys out. And just going from there, just that along with Brandon, again, I mentioned him several times now, but he's been a great mentor, and he's been training pitchers for a long, long time. Most people don't realize this. He's been doing like 3Ds and training pitchers for like 20 years now. That was kind of his like pet side project while running a bunch of PT clinics. But through all these different lenses and all these different brilliant people that I've been fortunate to know and listen to, it's kind of helped shape kind of how I program for guys, how I train guys. And this is kind of the quick and dirty of how that's gone. It's just been a constant cycle of dive into something, learn it, apply it, strip away what you don't like, what's not working, and then just keep repeating the cycle. And obviously, it's not anything unique to me. Any good coach is going to do that. That's how my process has been.
What have some of your initiatives been since taking over? Are there certain realms that you've taken the deeper dive in, or things that you've really tried to implement that you guys maybe weren't using before?
I guess the two big things that we're doing, and a lot of this is driven by Brandon too, but I was working with our biomechanist Joey, and we do a modified version of the ASH test. So we use force plates to measure shoulder strength internally, and we're going to start using dynamometers or the force plates to do more external work too. But IR at 90 in a Y position and in a T position, and just seeing how that correlates with certain guys in velo. Because I listened to, I believe his name is Ashcroft. Listened to him on I think a rugby podcast actually, and they talked about using this test for pitchers as well. And they'd see velocity jumps for, it was like a 50 Newton increase would lead to be a 1 mile an hour jump or whatever it was. We started implementing that just as a way to track our guys, because we didn't have a way to for us to track shoulder strength before that. Again, we might start using a dynamometer here with our summer group and have a little more data with that. But that was kind of the big thing. And so we track that. Any of our initial screens, we have them do that. And then the other big one, the kind of the fun, weird, quirky thing we're doing. Again, Brandon's been awesome on this, but with how his brain works. But we're using a trampoline as a way to increase force production. And the force plate results that we've gotten post test have been, I think it's like 98% of guys get better, and like the two or three that didn't were more as a byproduct that we just like our hypothesis was all right. They're these 140-pound skinny kids who can barely squat their body weight, so got to have a certain strength component before you can probably effectively make use of the stretch shortening cycle or elastic components like that.
Can you spend some more time on that? Because that's something that we're not seeing across most of the industry. There might be a few people here and there that are tapping into, I guess, the power of a trampoline or something springy, but you guys are one of the few in the baseball world for sure that are utilizing it.
Yeah, so again, Brandon came to us and was like, hey, he's got this big master plan in his brain. He's a wizard with the physiology. He said, we're going to start using this. I want you guys to test it, come up with a protocol for it, and here's what we're going to do. So started running that, and we're trying to find ways. I think this is important in any sports performance realm. How can we increase force production with the smallest cost possible from a fatigue standpoint? Using this as a primer, like they're a little hesitant at first because they might feel a little wobbly or weird, but once you see the objective data on a counter movement jump or a depth drop, like you can't, or a plyo push-up, you can't argue against it.
So you guys are using this for upper body stuff as well.
Exactly. Yeah, we have a kind of a dynamic, like short lever push-up, the active pressing that we do. We found that to be really helpful with guys who might be like really hypermobile and have a lot of horizontal abduction, a lot of layback, but might struggle to get out of those positions. That's obviously with those guys, they're not going to have the strength to be able to do it at a really deep range at first. But starting them off even in a little bit shallower of a range, it's been really helpful for them, and they love the feeling of it. They're like, oh, I can actually feel that happening now. And then again, force production goes up on the force plates, and they generally feel better in the throw as well.
And then from the lower body perspective, you talked about using it as a primer. So how might you incorporate the use of the trampoline into the workouts that you guys are doing?
Yeah, so most of it right now, because we're kind of in the early stages, we've only been testing it for about 6 months now. But the early stages of it, we keep it mostly at the end of a warm-up. So we'll have guys go through all their prep work. Some guys like to do it before plyos. Some guys like to do it after plyos, but we'll have them go through our little circuit that we have. And every time we have them touch the trampoline, we make sure that we're testing on the force plate pre and post as well. So trying to have a decent baseline of where guys are at. And then they go off and do their day and hopefully are performing a little bit better.
Talking about the use of a trampoline for sports performance, I'm just catching myself smiling. And it's not that there's anything wrong with it. If you guys are seeing benefit, that's amazing. It is just insane the rocks and the stones that can be unturned to find that next potential benefit to performance. It's what we talked about earlier to the odd ends of the earth that athletes are willing to travel just to get a little bit better. And what's probably worth noting is using the trampoline is only crazy if it doesn't work.
Yep, exactly. And that's our biomechanist actually, when Brandon was first talking about this, he was like, man, I just don't see it. I don't know how this is going to work. And then all of a sudden, better. It's like, oh my God, there's like something here. And there's a lot of different components being trained there, but the data doesn't lie. And early on, I will admit that like guys have a little bit of fatigue early on if we do too much. So we've kind of stripped the circuit down to one time through instead of the initial two that we were doing. But even still, like when the guys felt that fatigue, just such a different stimulus for them than they're probably ever used to, because most guys haven't jumped on a trampoline since they were probably 10 years old or in high school. But yeah, once guys adapt to it and numbers just keep going up. Obviously, I'm sure a lot of that's in accordance. It helps feed the weight room side of things too. We don't know how long this training effect lasts either. We test pretty acutely after we administer it, but obviously we're really excited about what we've seen so far.
Even for you now, putting the player hat back on, what have you experienced incorporating this into your protocols?
I freaking love it. So for me too, like I've always had balance and vestibular issues, and that's a big component that gets trained there as well. So anything for me to feel more stable or grounded is going to help me out. And after I get off that, that's exactly how I feel like heavy and strong in my legs. Because for me, when I struggle the most, it's when I feel like, I guess, air quote, like light or floaty on my back leg and doesn't feel grounded at all. I'm sure, obviously, most guys will probably feel that too. But for me, after doing the trampoline, like everything just feels solid, grounded. With one of the movements we do too, it really fires up your core as well. So just feels better.
Are there other weird or off the wall initiatives that you guys have implemented? I know you have a Proteus. I know not everything you do is just the weirdest thing that somebody has ever seen, but are there other creative things that you guys are using right now?
Yeah, the couple big things that we're using, we actually use a speed bag, like a boxing speed bag for some of our shoulder work, for some of our shoulder stability and reactivity work. And whether it's doing like quick repeated IRs, ERs, scat punches, we got a whole circuit that we go through there. We're actually in the arm wrestling realm. We have an arm wrestling training strap for training pronation, supination, and guys have really, really liked that because you can load that puppy up. You know, I obviously don't want to start a lot of these kids there, but for forearm health, they've really loved that. What other weird things do we do? We actually do again, definitely probably, maybe not the first to do this, maybe we are. We do arm wrestling in a very controlled manner with the goal of isometric training for the shoulder and not to beat your buddy on the table who might weigh 70 pounds less than you. So most of the time, I do a lot of the arm wrestling with the kids just to make sure that the intensity is where it needs to be. But isometrically ER, isometrically IR, and we go like a 3-to-1 ratio with back to front. But for guys' shoulders, they love that too. And for me too, I attribute a lot of why my velo is so good right now to that. For the whole winter, I was doing 15, 16 different athletes a day on the table arm wrestling with them. Great thing about isometrics, fatigue's generally not going to kick your butt. You're going to feel pretty good after it. So yeah, just good all around there.
All right. Yeah, those are definitely not responses I had on my bingo card for initiatives that you've been utilizing. I appreciate you sharing that. Now, more on the traditional side, we did mention it's kind of funny to call this traditional, but you have a Proteus in house. You obviously have squat racks and power racks and other lifts. So I'm assuming you guys are going to start with the basics for most athletes. And then when the stimulus calls for it, or if the athletes program calls for it, you're going to add in more of these quote unquote different stimuli.
Exactly. Yeah, well, you're never going to get away from the fundamentals, and that's what's so great about it. We also have force plates within our mound. We have force plates that we do all of our jump testing on. So between that, the Proteus mobility screen, the 3D review, if somebody does that, we have a pretty complete picture, in our opinion, of what a guy needs. And again, a kid who's 150 pounds and can't do a push-up or can't squat his body weight, as cool as a trampoline or something like that might be, we need to get you stronger. And depending on his build, whether that's just heavy bilateral squats, increasing your total force production, or I also have a little precision nutrition certification. So we offer a little nutrition consult too. It's like, hey, you need to eat all the food in the world and you need to lift heavy weights for probably a couple of years. And then we'll obviously sprinkle in some high velocity work, some jumping, some sprinting, some maybe a little bit of overspeed depending. But for the most part, you at 150 pounds, like that's our big priority. Let's get you stronger and let's get you bigger.
And now transitioning back to your current season or your evolution again as a player. So we talked a little bit about it. You've kind of leveled out again back at similar velocities to where you were in your younger years or prior to the shoulder injury, maybe topping a 5 or a 6 and sitting in that 2 to 4 range. You were 1 out away from a no-hitter earlier this year. Unfortunately, you followed that up with maybe not the best outing of all time, but that's okay.
Maybe one of the worst, but that's that's how this game works.
Yes, that is most certainly how this game works. But now with where you are as a player, of taking everything you've learned or this new frame of mind that you probably approach baseball with, since you're also working on the private side of things, how have you shifted as a competitor?
It's honestly been, what would be the best way to say this? I've been playing a lot more free going into last year. So I guess quick backstory with High Point was with last year, they told me out of camp that I was going to be the 5th starter. Day before the season, they're like, hey, we need you to piggyback. Big league guy comes in, whatever. Need you to piggyback, and if for 2 starts, and if 2 times through the rotation we don't have that starting spot for you, we'll release you and let you go find a spot to play. But that was after I'd taken the job with Octane, so I was like, okay, well, I'm kind of stuck. So anyway, 2 times through, the guys they thought were going to get signed didn't, so I was released. They called me back like 6 weeks later, and we're like, hey, like, or 6 to 8 weeks later, whatever it was. They're like, hey, can you come pitch? Like, we need a starter for tomorrow. So I was like, yeah, I'll come pitch.
For tomorrow.
Yeah. So literally went the next day, went 6 innings, had a good game, and kind of pitched well for the rest of the year from there. But it was just a lot more free, especially at that point. after getting bounced out once, and I was like, man, like stuff is finally better. I was kind of dejected, and then when I got back, I was like, man, we're just gonna play so free. Like this is borrowed time. Like we probably shouldn't be here at this age, being able to throw, have better stuff than you have at any point in your career. So like, let's just treat it as a game. Like have fun with it. While there's still the hyper competitive element within it, it was in a different framework for me. It was in the past, it was I want to kill this hitter, and now it's like, oh, like I just want to beat you with really good stuff and like have fun doing it. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but that was kind of the big shift that I made.
Did it almost feel like you were then playing a video game in a sense later on, as opposed to early in your career, every pitch probably felt like life or death, versus now it sounds like it turned into an experiment in a sense, or just like, oh, well, we'll see if this works. Not that you didn't care anymore. It's just the way that you approached it completely changed.
Yeah, that's actually probably a good way to say it, because and and not because I don't care, but like the mindset is almost when you're out there, it's like, oh, who cares? Like, you make a bad pitch, he hits it, like, ah, that sucked. You probably shouldn't have thrown it there, you idiot. We're in the past, it's just piss and vinegar and fire, which there's still an element of that there, but now it's understand like being more cerebral about the game, and for me is what it feels like. Paying more attention to what the swing looks like, what the take looks like, just at a different level before, because I would still do that when I was competing, but then there's always that little bit of, especially when you're young, it's like, oh, I'm going to blow this heater by. It's like, well, 93, 94 is cool, but it's not necessarily like premium velo where you're going to just be able to blow doors all day. So, yeah, I guess just really transition more into it's a video game. It does feel like a video game. You're out there, you're just having fun and trying to not be so results driven and just trust the process of what you've built and what you've created. Understand like what you're, now that I actually have an understanding of what my profiles are, I can actually attack guys with that information instead of before it's like, oh, little heater at the knees. Like, well, actually, if you can ride the ball up to like 18, 20 on your good days, like maybe you should have figured out a way to throw the ball at the chest more often.
I didn't even think of it until you kind of brought in that cerebral approach to what you're doing now. On my side, just a clue into what goes through my head while I'm listening to these responses. I started thinking of the spectrum of performance and how, for some people, the cerebral approach can be freeing because you're finally noticing things that you never noticed before. And then others will fall into analysis by paralysis because they start taking in context that never mattered previously. But for you, you found this kind of new common ground with the game that you can actually let it come to you, you can analyze, process, and then perform with what you know you have. Now, another side of this, which is where my mind was going, is you've done this or you've competed on the affiliated side as well as the independent league side and internationally. Offer some context as to how each of those arenas of baseball are different, or maybe how they're similar.
Yeah, it felt like internationally, I'll start on that. Like internationally, it really felt like old school baseball in the sense that, like, obviously, velocity is always going to be sexy and cool, but we had guys on our team in Mexico who were like 84, 86, and were just good pitchers. They stayed around for a long time. They're still pitching down there now and doing well. So it was, hey, you do the job and you put up numbers, like, you're going to have a job. Obviously, the way affiliate ball has gone now, velocity is premium, stuff is premium. So even if a guy struggles for a couple of years, but he's got premium stuff, like he's probably gonna have a job for a while. And then I guess on the independent side, you see a mix of everything, right? You see big league guys trying to get back. You see minor league guys, guys who've got minor league time like myself trying to get back. You've got the rookie straight out of college trying to get back. You've got the long-term indie ball grinder who's in his last year and can go out and probably pitch with a lot of people in the world, but from a stuff perspective might not be there. I guess that's probably the reliance on stuff, or like the desire for stuff is kind of what it seems is the big difference between all the different levels.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's kind of what I expected, but I don't think that gets talked about enough. Just the need for stuff in affiliated ball, but then you go to the indie leagues and people will say like, "Oh, those guys aren't as good." That's not true at all. You can see guys that are big league caliber pitchers any given day in independent leagues. They might not flash the same stuff. They might not flash the 21 IVB heater or the 2,600 spin rate on a fastball, the 3,200 RPM slider or whatever, because that's the stuff that projects an affiliated ball. Like that's the stuff, as you said, that keeps you around. And then you go to indie ball and you're going to see a guy that has quote unquote average stuff, but would be Greg Maddox equivalent for whatever league he's in.
Yeah, exactly. And that's I think is so cool about baseball is I guess cool but not cool now for the over reliance on analytics and whatnot. But like there's so many guys out there that are really good pitchers that might not ever get a shot because maybe they're not able to flash a number. But if they get a chance in Mexico or they get a chance to go to Asia, they're probably going to pitch pretty well.
Maybe this is looking too far ahead because you have this awesome job at Octane, you're doing incredible things. Is there still a goal or a dream with a destination in the baseball world for you? Or right now, is it literally baseball is so much fun, I'm just going to keep playing it while I have this incredible opportunity where I'm able to work in baseball and play at the same time?
There's definitely a goal, and whether that's whether I'm able to get a chance in Asia or get back to an affiliate for one last shot, it's kind of what I've always looked for the last couple of years, especially since I kind of revamped the arsenal and everything, just to prove that still got something left to offer this game at a very high level, and that I can compete with the best in the world. And that's kind of the goal. And so whether that's getting a chance in Asia or getting back to an affiliate, which is obviously pitching in the big leagues, has been a dream of mine since I was 3. So now that I feel like physically and mentally I'm in the right place for that, just gotta go pitch well and let the cards fall where they may, because you can't always dictate the opportunity or the timing of things, but go out and control what I can control as much as I can and have a lot of fun doing it.
Beautiful. I love it. And to round things out now, just share something that the world might not know about you, something you like to do, something silly about you. I'm going to steal one that you went viral previously on social media for falling while throwing a bullpen. That's an incredible video, by the way. I think we have it on our Instagram at FlexPro Grip. I'm sure it's floating around some other places, but Matt Solter falling while throwing a bullpen and then floating through space is just an incredible video, and I highly suggest anybody go watch that. Something else, maybe as goofy as that, I'd love if you could share.
Yeah, well, I guess quick side story about that too. That video is actually what got me signed by the Indians. Excuse me. Yeah, they got posted, and the Indians reached out to my trainers at the time, and one thing led to another, and that's how that happened. And led to me pitching in some big league spring training games and doing some cool things there. But something silly about myself or different. I play a lot of chess. I'm a big chess nerd. I'm a big anime nerd. My walkout song this year is actually from the new anime Solo Leveling, which for any of my anime people out there, is probably going to be one of the best animes of all time with a pretty electric intro. So I'm just kind of a nerd.
Yeah, those are good ones. I'll definitely accept that. Yeah, this is the underbelly of the baseball world where we actually get to see some personalities. I don't want to say rear their ugly heads, but maybe show their true colors. And you understand that everybody on the field is just a really big little kid at the end of the day.
That's why we keep doing this.
For the ones who refuse to grow up, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Matt, thanks so much for your time today. It is weird to call you Matt, but I guess in this formal setting, that's okay. But really, really appreciate your time. This has been awesome to talk to you in this more formal setting as opposed to just firing some texts off back and forth or the occasional phone call. Is there a way that people can either get in touch with you to continue the conversation or if they're interested in training with Octane?
Yeah. Biggest thing on social media, Instagram is probably where I'm most active, at Matt Solter, Solter. Shoot me a DM on there. We can always talk. I'm always happy to help or give Octane a call. I don't have that number offhand. Yeah, give us a call. We offer remote programming that's really affordable. We're super passionate about getting guys better. That's kind of, we brought in a lot of really good people who are really good at their jobs, and reach out, talk to us. See if we can help.
And maybe I'll help with some of the plug. The Octane, what is it? Octane Baseball, but spelled with an 8 instead of an O on Instagram.
Yep, 8 CTANE baseball. And that's just an ode to that B. Young, Brandon Young, the wizard that he is. He came up with the 8 cylinders of pitching for his 3D report. So it's just a little ode to that.
Once again, thank you, Solter. This has been great. And to all the listeners out there, thanks for laying back with us.